home, he said, after the game. And he said, Donovan McNabb couldn't throw the ball very far, and the Vikings only lost. And he was correct on all of that. So I ended up giving the tickets. Well, I stopped buying them, and many of you know Dr. Jaffe probably. He still has the seats, and he's up here on your campus now while they're playing outdoors. I did not grow up in this climate, so I don't watch football outside in the winter. Any of you find it cold here in the winter besides me? Yeah, okay, yeah. I've lived here 26 years. I only came for 3. And people say, why did you stay 26? And you know what I tell them? The snow has been so bad, I've not been able to leave yet. And they actually believe it, you know. And the other answer we often give, maybe it's true in the Twin Cities, but at least in southern Minnesota, the other answer is we couldn't find anyone to buy the snowblower, so we had to stay. But you probably don't have that here, right? You know, that would be more out in the suburbs. But Minnesota has been very good to me. Coming to Mayo was a great career move. I had no idea it would so enhance things. I think you're at a great center too. This historically, you know, is the epicenter of heart failure treatment for today. You probably know that, but the whole concept of vasodilator therapy was an idea in the 70s. If you don't know the story about that, or do they teach you about that here as part of the history? Yeah. I know when I was a fellow, we would meet every quarter in Red Wing with Gary Francis and some U of M faculty, and it was neat. Mayo faculty and fellows would come up, and Gary would bring some people down. We would have heart failure discussions. So I started reading about Jay Cohn's editorials in the 70s, his ideas about vasodilator therapy, the paradigm shift that brought to heart failure. We think that's pretty normal, right? That's what we have grown up learning in medical school. I've been out a long time compared to you, but we've both learned it together. We've watched patients get better from it. But it was really a radical idea when he proposed it in the 70s. And remember, I flew from the ESC a few years ago back with Jay to Minneapolis, and we sat together, and I said to him, it was quite a radical paradigm, you know. Did you have trouble getting it accepted? He said, yeah, it was a challenge. But he, as you probably know, Dr. Cohn, he perseveres, and by sheer force of his personality, I think he got the world to embrace it, and now we, of course, are delighted that we have. So I thought when Ganesh asked me to come, he asked me to propose some ideas for talks. So I threw out some topics, and as Ganesh, I love him because he said, I don't really like any of those. Do you have other ideas? And I said, yeah, of course. So I went a little deeper into the well and came up with one. I said, how about something I get asked a lot about by our fellows? You know, what does it take, or what are the challenges of a career in cardiology, especially academic cardiology? He said, yeah, that would be great. Our fellows would love that. Any of you worried about your futures? Yeah? Yeah? How many of you are first-year fellows? Okay, second year, and then, of course, the last year, right, the third year. We've got a couple. You know, a few years ago, I was helping our fellows find jobs, and I got scared because we could not place an interventional fellow into an academic job. This was 2 or 3 years ago. And I called Steve Nissen at Cleveland Clinic, and I said, do you have any jobs? We have some outstanding interventionalists. Can you help me find positions? He says, good luck. There's only one in a certain place in North Carolina, and I just placed one of my fellows there. And I thought, uh-oh, this was bad. And really, until May, it took me until May or June to help 1 or 2 of our fellows get jobs. And 1 or 2, I suggested they do additional training as a way to sort of wait the market out. Sometimes the market just hits a low point. It did when I was in training. I finished training in '96, and probably a year before I finished, or it was maybe 2 years before, it was at a pretty low point. And so it was hard to find positions at times. And the cardiac surgeons were all, that time, believe it or not, going into the training because they couldn't stomach the idea of going out and making less than psychiatrists. And that was what the job market was for cardiac surgeons. So I thought I wanted to put some thoughts together on a career in academic cardiology. So here are my test case of 4 issues that I think are important to think about. And then I'm going to stop after that, and we'll just do questions. Is that okay? So I want to throw out 4 ideas to you that I think are going to impact how you decide what job you take when you finish here, and whether you can stay in that job or whether you transition to another one, okay? Let me just first say, though, that being a physician, as well as even an academic physician, remains a very fulfilling career choice. You're very lucky because you're like in the only field, maybe 1 or 2 other fields, where you can get a job anywhere in the world that you want and be paid reasonably well. You'll never go hungry. You'll always be in the upper third to upper 10% of income earners. and you'll be very important in the lives of people. People will value your services, you know. We're lucky because many of us had choices in college. We could have gone to engineering school, I don't know, gone into Wall Street, law school, you know, whatever. But you picked medicine, so it's going to be a fulfilling career. But there's going to be challenges that I think you should prepare for, and they're very similar now between academic cardiology and private practices. Previously, when I was new faculty and even thinking about being an academic physician, your status as a academic cardiologist was dependent on your grant funding, largely NIH versus industry, right? How much could you bring in? And that's because institutions are ranked by grants, and also indirects from grants help pay for expenses. And so chairs and deans had to have so much revenue to keep the project and the mission going. And also, you were promoted based on your publications. I know in the first 5 years I was on staff at Mayo, my mentors kept saying, you got to publish, we can't promote you if you don't publish. So you go around all the time, day and night, writing papers, you know, and doing all this. And I'll remember the day I got promoted to full professor. I realized I didn't have to publish anymore if I didn't want to. And it's totally different than 5 years before when you're sweating getting stuff published. But in the 2000s, things changed, I said a bit. It's really a lot. Something called healthcare integration happened. You guys are integrated in the Fairview system, right? That happened before most of you came, though, right? I remember when it started to happen. Mayo developed its own health system. We have a lot of hospitals around the state. And so when this happened, then that changed the models of how things get paid for and the compensation models. And it's still a challenge between the private practice groups and the academic physicians. Who do we pay? How do we pay? Do we pay them the same? Do we pay the productive people more? And what's productivity? All this stuff. And I think all the focus on money and staying afloat financially has pushed research and publishing to a little bit of a back or mid-row seat. And that's been a challenge. And so that's how things have changed. And you know, now being a chair of medicine or a chair of cardiology is you almost need an MBA, because you got to figure out where the budgets are, where the costs are, and how to make money. And you know, in the past, we've historically picked our chairs based upon their success as a researcher. Can they be a well-funded NIH researcher, right? So our current chair of cardiology at Mayo got his MBA at the University of Minnesota when he was a young faculty, and it turned out to be a very strategic move for him because it prepared him well to be a chair of cardiology. So I think there are 4 challenges that we're all going to face, your generation especially, and my own children if they think about medicine, that will determine what kind of jobs you want to take. The first is, will we have research funding available, and will there be an infrastructure for you to work in if you decide to be an academic cardiologist? The second is the critical role of educational debt. Third is burnout. You may not think about that, but that's a big issue after people become faculty and start working as doctors. And the fourth is what I euphemistically call regulatory oversight. So research funding. How many of you want to have be NIH funded in your careers right now? Those are your career goals. So we have 1, 2, 3, maybe a couple more, 4 or 5. Okay. Well, what will be the challenges for this? And can you have a career as a funded investigator? And will the NIH funding be rescued? Well, look at this slide and tell me your interpretation of NIH funding over the last 15 years. It's not, is it? It's pretty flat, isn't it? It's steady. It's steady, but it's not going up. And it's true for cardiovascular research, right? As we can see here, heart. And we get the lion's share of the money. We get about 40, 50%. And here's lung. Blood is down here, and all of this. But it's been pretty flat. And that's been the case, apparently, for a long time. If you look at constant dollars, you can see that it's declined a bit because of budgetary pressures and deficits and things like that, probably sequestration. If you look at how their funding awards, you can see that investigator-initiated grants are still the lion's share of the funding, right? And institutional awards get about a third. And if you look at total obligations by budget mechanism, you can see that it's pretty well fixed. So I think you really were correct when you said that it's not following inflation, and it's been largely fixed, you know? And so what happens if you have more and more people as investigators if the funding is fixed? So what happens to the number of dollars per investigator? Yeah, it decreases, right? Or you have a few people who can't get funding. And that's been the case at Mayo. Many of our NIH-funded investigators now don't have grants. Some of our people who 10 years ago were mentoring young trainees and fellows and medical residents, had postdocs in their labs, now don't have any funding or any labs because their grants were not renewed. In fact, one of my colleagues who was quite accomplished had the last 2 grants triaged. Do you know what a triage means for a grant? I didn't know this either. Who knows what triaging is? Tell us what triaging is. Exactly. And he had a lab full of people that he was paying salary for. And he had successful NIH funding for 15 or 20 years. And his grants started getting triaged. That's pretty competitive and cutthroat, in my view. So I think what you're going to find is that NIH funding, historically, is fixed. It seems to be a fixed % of the budget. And if you go into it, it's going to be a challenge to get funding. And so creative investigators have to be able to cobble together multiple funding streams to be successful. So how do you do that? I think first you got to find great mentors who are successful. Look at people here who have been funded until their 60s and 70s. Work with them. Ask them, what are the secrets? And when you go take a job, go work for an institution that has a strong, consistent track record for funding, especially during the lean years when they don't have a lot of NIH money. Many institutions have ways to pay for that called endowments, and they will support you, but you need to ask for that. And finally, if this really is your goal, what I suggest is that you stay committed to your primary goal. And this is true for anything in cardiology. Most of you set several goals. You want to be an academic cardiologist or a premier cardiologist. You want to have a teaching excellence. You want to do research and all that. But really, Valentin Fuster once told us, when I was a fellow, you got to focus. And that's so true. And you got to pick really one thing that you want to be superb at and narrowly focus on that one thing. And even in research, the more narrowly you focus, the better generally you are. And so if you're going to be an investigator, I think you have to make a decision that you're going to put all of your effort into that and that you need to be thinking about grants out 10 to 15 years and how you can stay competitive. If your goal is to be a great clinician, then you want to pick a practice type, I think, where you feel comfortable working in that will reinforce your values and your work style and let you excel. And if you want to be an educator, well, when you interview for work, be transparent about that and let the place hiring you know that so they don't expect you to be writing grants if you're not. So that's the first challenge. The second is educational debt. Do any of you have student loans? All right. Anybody not with student loans, right? I had them, paid them off when I was a fellow. Something happened after I went to medical school. It suddenly got expensive. I finished medical school with about $45,000 in debt. Wouldn't that be nice? Yeah. I looked at the cost of tuition at the medical school here, and I fell out of my chair a couple of years ago. It's like $55,000, right?
Average, when I left here in 2009, the average debt was $109.
Yeah. Yeah, and I looked at the cost of tuition at Harvard Medical School, and guess how much Harvard cost the University of Minnesota compared? Anybody a graduate of Harvard Medical School? It's the same. Isn't that amazing? Everybody's now charging as much as they can. So educational debt is going to impact what you do because you have to manage it and plan it into your future years. Of course, it's too late now for you to stop the debt, right? Because you've already, it's a good investment for you, but it's a real issue. And this is, in the news, this is a sort of a case example. This is a true story. Emily Van Kirk and her husband have a combined $692,000 in debt from their time at the American University of the Caribbean School in St. Martin. Now, I went to the University of Kentucky. It's almost a Caribbean medical school, but it's not. We're really known for basketball. I'd grown up in Kentucky, so I didn't know there was any other school, right? But if I'd known about the Caribbean schools, I might have gone just to have a great climate, right? But they had a tremendous amount of debts. And it's really, they say Mrs. Van Kirk, now I guess it's Dr. Van Kirk, Mrs. Dr. Van Kirk, who specialized in internal medicine, just finished her residency, and they say it's about to start a permanent job, I think at a Kaiser physician, making $200,000 a year, which is a reasonably good income, right? I know my first job in cardiology didn't pay quite like that. This is going to really impact them, and they're paying, I guess, $400 or $500 a month, and they're going to have to be paying a lot more. And this is the problem with debt loads. You know, this is where we are in terms of it's what the Federal Reserve Bank of New York has to say about the number of Americans with at least $100,000 in student debt. We have, is that right? 2 million people now with $100,000 in student debt. That's incredible. I knew I'd heard that we had $1 trillion in student debt, but it's going to be $2 trillion if I'm doing the math correct here. This is amazing. And medical students are, of course, some of the most indebted students, as are law students. And you can see that the amount of debt right now, as you said, it's $175,000 here. For law school, it's a bit less. And my own children are thinking about this. I have one daughter I've been urging to go to law school, and she has no student debt because we made a commitment to her to not that we would pay for college and graduate school. But she's decided she doesn't want to go to law school because she doesn't think that debt is worth the return on investment. And that's not a thought process I went through when I was in college. You know, whatever you did, you could pay it off in a few years. But I think this is a challenge, and so this is going to be a challenge for your generation. And it may mean that some of you can't become academic doctors because we just don't pay well enough to help you service the debt. If that's the case, that's okay. This is a generational issue. Your children will not suffer this. We'll figure out funding for higher education before you have children in college, I think, and we'll get the costs back down. The third is burnout. Do you guys do any screening for burnout as in residency or fellowship now? Do they do that at all for you? Okay. I have several colleagues at Mayo who write and publish a lot about it. And this was an article from the Washington Post talking about physician burnout and talking about a study in the archives of internal medicine. And look at who the most likely specialties are to be burned out. We rank up here pretty high. Internal medicine, over 70% of us are burned out. Is that shocking to you? This is not just general internal medicine, it's subspecialties, including cardiologists. Yeah.
I question a little bit because dermatology ranks higher than OB-GYN. I've never met a burnt out dermatologist. I know.
I don't know about you, but I really never could get into understanding skin rashes, so I didn't even consider dermatology.
No.
Yeah. But even pathology's burned out. I'm surprised there, you know. It's terrible. Psychiatry, no surprise there. They deal with patients all the time who would make all of us fatigued, exhausted, and burned out. I'm surprised ER. Most people who go into ER seem to really choose that for lifestyle that I've met. They like the shift work. They like being able to leave the work at the hospital and get out. But, you know, many of them are. This, of course, was a newspaper article about a Stanford program. There's a little trouble getting it to advance here. This guy was a physician at Stanford who Stanford was doing stuff to help him with burnout. They were giving him coupons for dry cleaning, laundry, valet services, and other things, house cleaning, and he said it was a great thing. And I talked to one of my colleagues at Mayo who knew this man, and he said, yeah, they did this, and it became so expensive, Stanford stopped. And they stopped like 2 years ahead of the Washington Post article, so I was quite surprised that the writers of the Washington Post didn't pick up on the fact that Stanford had stopped this. But anyway, burnout is a real issue because of all that you do, and it's affecting both genders, men and women. It's affecting people at various levels, assistant professors, associate professors. It's really a challenge. And one of the things I found that I think we should be talking with house staff about and physicians in general is how do you really deal with burnout before you decide to just leave the medical profession? Because we are very worried in my generation about your generation. Because we're seeing an exodus from the medical profession within 5 years of finishing training, higher than we've ever seen. And I hope that that your generation will help us to understand how we fix this so that you don't feel compelled to leave medicine, because all the training you've been through to help humanity. We need you, and we need you for the next 35 or 40 years. But these are the sort of the rules about how to avoid burnout, and that I found interesting in the article, and they sort of are counter present in house and residency. Get enough sleep, right? It's hard to do that working in the ICU, isn't it? And taking calls. Take regular breaks. Well, that's good, several times a day. Let's build that into the schedule for your busy clinics. Regularly vacation to recharge. Now, I'm all for this. If we could double our vacation, wouldn't it be great? And then, of course, other things. Breathe. I'm not really sure what that has to do with it. If you don't breathe, you may end up as a research subject, right, in one of your studies. And then unprison yourself from technology. So I think unplug your devices in the evenings, or when you're on vacation, turn your email off. Any of you check your email on vacation like I do? Yeah. I did a little trip to the Caribbean in October, and with my iPhone, I turned off my Mayo Clinic email. It was the best thing. And about 3 days into the vacation, I'd forgotten I did it. And I said to myself, it's great. I'm not getting much work email. This is really fabulous, you know. And then when I realized what I'd done. I turned it back on, and 350 messages downloaded. So then I dealt with those after the vacation. So the final thing I want to bring you up to date on is regulatory oversight. Now, this is a fancy term. It's not intended to be fancy, but I don't know a nicer way to say it. But this was a nice story that was about a little hospital just east of here, about 50 miles. The story began in the Wall Street Journal because it said the hospital said it hadn't been sanctioned or disciplined in connection with Mrs. Thomas's care. Any of you see this story? Does this ring a bell yet from 2 weeks ago? Arlene Thomas chose to have her total knee done in Neillsville, Wisconsin. Any of you know where that is? Yeah. I spent the night in Neillsville, Wisconsin when I interviewed for residency. Can you imagine why? It was in November. My wife and I drove up from Lexington, Kentucky to the Marshfield Clinic, interviewed. The next day I was interviewing at the Mayo Clinic. I thought I might as well make the most of the interview, stop in Marshfield, stop at Mayo, and then stop at WashU on the way home. Had no idea the drives were so far. We get to Marshfield, and they mentioned to me that there's a snowstorm coming in, and maybe we should start heading to Rochester. So we do drive, and we get all of 15 miles out of Marshfield to Neillsville. That's about how far it is, isn't it? Do you recall? All right. Yeah, all right. And Neillsville is about how big? Yeah, 1,000 people, and we were stuck in a snowdrift. And fortunately, there was a bar, grill, and motel combination right beside where we were, so we spent the night there. Well, Mrs. Thomas decided to have a total knee done at the small hospital in rural Neillsville instead of going 35 minutes away to Marshfield Clinic. And 7 days after she had her total knee, she died of a heart attack at a bigger hospital 30 miles away in Marshfield. There we go. According to the documents reviewed by the Wall Street Journal. And a doctor at Marshfield noted that the attack was likely a complication of the surgery. Now, what struck me as peculiar was that this was the point in the news article. The hospital said it hadn't been sanctioned or disciplined in connection with her care. It just shows you how ignorant the writer is about post-operative infarcts. Have you ever seen one at the University of Minnesota? Really? It's why we have jobs as cardiologists, right? Yeah. Nor has the Mayo Clinic, and we've had a few ourselves, you know. In fact, I've published some papers with colleagues on this after hip surgery in the elderly. It's a deadly thing. And the whole point of the article was that this hospital in Wisconsin was being financially incentivized to do surgery to make money, and that was harmful to poor Mrs. Thomas's care. And the hospital is part of what's called a critical access hospital. So if you know what that is, it basically means you get your expenses plus 5% profit. And Wall Street Journal's analysis shows that the fastest growing procedures at critical access hospitals are often elective orthopedic surgeries that otherwise could be scheduled at facilities with more experience. And then they talked to someone at Medicare, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, who agrees that changes should be made to critical access hospital designation and payment systems. She said Medicare should be a purchaser of effective and efficient health care for all beneficiaries. And then, you know, there was some concern that they could save $1 million a year, what the auditor said. And then the orthopedic surgeon, I'm not sure where this place is, said that the government should require mandatory reporting, et cetera. And this is just a graph showing what's happening at rural access hospitals. So anyway, you're going to go out and practice, and you're going to see these kinds of patients, and suddenly you're going to see a newspaper article that says you were negligent in your care or that your hospital is not doing a great job and the person had a heart attack, and yet they have no idea if she was the one heart attack that year at that hospital or if this was a problem. You know, I was away from Mayo for 1 year, and I went into a hospital system, and I thought it was a pretty good place. It turned out it wasn't. But there was a competing cardiology group in practice with us. And the person in that group had an elective mortality rate with angioplasty of 21%. And nobody in the hospital would do anything about it. I kept saying, this is ridiculous. This guy's killing people. Yeah, we know that. Don't send your patients to him. And I said, well, why don't you stand up to him? No, we can't do that because then we'd lose all the business. That other group would come in and sue us. Give me a break, you know. This guy asked me, I had a hospital contact me about 2 years later and asked me to serve as a reference for this physician because he had moved on. And I suggested they ask to see his mortality data for elective PCI, and that would answer the questions. And, I mean, there are examples of poor practice of medicine, but for the most part, you're going to do your best job, but you're going to have people looking over your shoulder and guessing about whether you're doing a good job or not. Just expect that. So it's going to be an issue for all of us. Be prepared for it. How does it help to be prepared for it? Well, I think if you're involved in organized medicine, whether it's the American College of Cardiology or the American Medical Association or any group, it will help you to understand what's going on. Just embrace it. Don't resist it because it's not going away. My generation's struggle was being sued. Right? Malpractice was the great fear for us. And sort of once you get sued, you feel bad about it. Then you realize it's not a matter of if, but when people get sued. And this is the same for this. So my final thoughts are you're going to have a great career. You're incredibly lucky. You can work anywhere in the world you want. People are going to value your work. Other physicians are going to value your work. Just be prepared for it and really do what you want to do. Decide what you like, set your goals, and just do those because you'll be very successful. You may or may not be able to do academic cardiology or medicine. A lot of that's not you. It's just timing, you know. And every year we have young fellows that want to stay at Mayo. We don't hire them, and they talk with us, and we say to them, it's not you. If we had 5 job openings, we would hire you. We just don't, you know. It's a matter of timing. I was very lucky when Mayo was hiring. I was ready, and they hired me, you know. But I'm also now old enough to know that you can be happy and fulfilled working many places. So there's just not one perfect job for you. But I'm interested in here for you to ask me questions because I'm sharing with you my thoughts. But why don't you ask me questions? Anything is open. Unless you're Donald Trump. We'll take all of them. Yeah, start right there.
You know, I heard that procedures, right? That's true, or it's true in terms
Yeah.
go about preparing patients? That number of patients.
Yes, yes. That's a good set of questions. And it used to be true, but I don't think it is in 2016 that there are hiring needs at every academic center, including your own. And I know from some recent faculty openings that were here because I wrote people letters of recommendation. There were some research positions open and there were some function positions open. And people applied maybe for a clinician position who wanted more research time and the needs of the institution, whether they needed someone to clinical work. Because really the biggest challenge of an academic position is to teach your generation, the next generation, how to practice cardiology, do it well, but also do it in a way that encourages you to feel confident to ask questions, to challenge us. Because if you don't challenge me on how I do something, I don't learn, and you don't learn, right? One of my favorite teachers when I was a fellow at Mayo was the U of M guy who came down after some years ago. His first day on service, he said, my job is to let you drive the car in the ditch, just don't spill it yourself, anyone else, you damage your car. He was very good about giving us a lot of autonomy, and I try to do that with myself. I think that's important. So I don't think it's fair that they're always looking for researchers. That's what makes the time for hiring non-researchers. There are research positions, there are educator positions, there are clinician positions. You've got to pick a position that fits your strengths. And I think the way you make yourself competitive for a clinician educator job is to be trained in education and understand how to teach. Take advantage of some of the courses on teaching these positions that are offered. And you're not going to have a lot of publications, but you are going to develop skills in terms of teaching, and you're going to give good talks and lectures, and they'll hire you for that. And there's nothing wrong with that. We tend to recognize the researchers more. They get promoted, they get endowed chairs, they get a lot of accolades that poor clinician educators don't. So we at Mayo do recognize that you get a teacher of the year award. And 5% of our faculty think that in the top 5%. We try to encourage that. So a lot of places do that. That's those are the challenges. You may have to look for a job that offers what you want to do, but look for that job. Don't be geographically restricted.
Have a comment or thought about here in your last 2 points I think are intricately linked to the regulatory oversight and burnout, having lots of people in practice. I think one of the bigger frustrations is you've trained so long and done all this hard work, and all of a sudden you're become no longer physicians have done a very poor job of expanding the together and forming, a union, for lack of a better word, a union, that is within, one voice. And so we're all fractured within a very small, prism of some specialty, but the, almost feel, people are common, they feel replaceable, where, you don't have a, freedom, if you have one mistake or one complication, people feel like they're a little bit more expendable, or, that's kind of a big challenge for younger physicians, is what I was talking to them, that seems to be more commonplace now. And I guess my question for you is, what are some of the stumbling blocks, around that would stop cardiologists, there's, cardiologists, kind of working together and forming a more cohesive voice to help influence policy, or because we don't do a great job of that. And we don't organize big money or big, business can kind of control how we operate versus.
Yeah, that's right. You raised a number of issues, and I have to say that I have seen each of those perspectives, and I understand my own colleagues feel that way. I spent about 10 years of my life from 2002, about 2012, doing a lot of advocacy work on behalf of cardiologists. I was governor of the Untitled Chapter of the ACC for a few years. I actually ran for political office in 2006. State was kind of floundering, healthcare leadership, educational leadership, develop better healthcare coverage, and some other stuff. And so I kind of lived the talk on advocacy, and I have to say that what I have learned is that we are terrible at advocacy. Most of the time we go to the legislature or the government and we ask for fewer rules and more money. Ever say we can do this cheaper, or we never say we want to do this for our patients and do it better. Our pay is not cheap, but we're interested in having good at-risk populations, minority populations, even city populations, risk rural populations. We don't do that, and so we haven't learned how to focus our arguments in a way that advocates for our patients well enough. But I think we fall short because the thought among politicians is that we're all rich doctors. After in 1994, Minnesota passed a tax on healthcare providers called the Minnesota Care Tax. And it's funny because the years after that, through the Minnesota Medical Association, there was talk about all we could do to repeal it. They would say, let's not have another Minnesota-based capital. Too many doctors showed them BMWs and Mercedes, and we were trying to tell them about that tax and it backfired. So when you look around, even if you're not as well paid as your preceding generation, you're much better paid than most professions. So we stand on a weak argument when we talk about money. So it's a challenge, and I think what we have to do is decide what are our core values. Coming to serve humanity, or do something to give, have an easy lifestyle, whatever. And I think most of us pick the profession to serve humanity because science is interesting, so we want to make health better. And we have to talk about it in those terms. We earn our income, we're not overpaid, we earn our income. But we shouldn't be ashamed of that, but we also have to understand that there are lots of people who suffer more than us, and we need to be consistent and acknowledge that. So I think that's a challenge. I think it's going to be very hard to organize doctors who believe it because we're not hurting cats. Folks should secure the doctors do something better than you can do cats, so that's a challenge. So I think until we figure out what commonly unites us, we will then move ahead. I think I've asked the American, I'll be in a second, I asked the American College of Cardiology about 8 years ago, we have an advocacy meeting about the future. Because the future is not just going to be changing legislation, getting Medicare better funded, other stuff. We need to talk about contracting, unionization, employee relationships, labor relationships, because most of us are going to be salaried and employed rather than owning our own practices, and we need to prepare for that. And of course, that's where cardiology has gone and medicine has gone, but we haven't really prepared for that. And that's a challenge for your generation to understand all of those complexities. What I will say is that it's very expensive to recruit a doctor. It's very expensive to have a doctor leave and then replace the doctor. So we actually have no job security then, we realize, because they need us more than we need them. We can go anywhere. You can't get a job in Minneapolis, you go to Fargo or Grand Forks, Bismarck can get a job, you go to Sioux Falls, you go to Des Moines, you go to Milwaukee, Madison, find work, and you go, even the Lexington, Kentucky, So maybe that's one of the needs then, but I think, we're gonna feel a lot like school teachers. One of the reasons I went to medicine, my parents were teachers, I thought teachers were too managed. They were being told what to do all the time, and I wanted a little more autonomy. It's kind of followed me into medicine. And I'm kind of like my parents were when they were in their fifties. I'm complaining about the very things you've raised, and that's how they felt. And but I think we'll turn the corner. I think it will get better. But you're right. You're exactly spot on in terms of the issue. And so you just be prepared to deal with it. Because you're going to have those feelings. Those are normal feelings. But the fears of all that stuff is greater than the reality of it. Okay.
Well, there is to be a very nice visual where you can apply the editor-in-chief of system, saying that you're coming from an era where the highest chances of you getting an autonomy in the future is that how much image for. So what is your advice for the young fellows or young faculty in fellowship to academia? How to be able to get your own funding, so to speak, at a start, to be more competitive, for academic universities?
I didn't see that editorial, but that's been my conclusion too, because the machine will feed the current people more than it will the young people. So my advice is to out of 60 NIH funding by have dedicated streams for new investigators, mid-career, and senior people, and not let them overlap. Because right now we're cannibalizing our young, sustaining the old, that's always a mistake. Barring any change in the government, which is probably not going to happen for a while, I think the keys are what I said in my talk, which is to find a place that has a great track record of getting young people funded, young faculty, keep them funded from mid-career and into senior career, and work with organizations that create about that. There are places that do it, there are places that don't. So I think you have to look ahead, look at the number of faculty who've kept their grants over this time, that's all public records, and pick those places. And if you have to, go work as a postdoc for a year or two at those places, or as a young faculty. But it's just a professional until you get your academic credentials, they bring you into their research goals. Yeah.
Probably for the first job, academic job, won't have specific time, especially if there's no funding. Well, I talked to somebody before and told me you have a specific time from Friday 6 p.m. to Monday 8 p.m. How do you manage family and work in this situation?
Yeah, I don't have the answer for that. We jokingly say that Mayo gives all of us 12 hours a day for research, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., except now I have to work Friday night, 6 p.m. to Saturday, 7 a.m. in our ICU. There's a cardiac intensivist can do that for 3 nights, now I'm working my night clinically. I think what you do, though, you come to some degree of equipoise with your life. You can't quit day and night, 24/7, constantly writing grants or communication. I tell my young faculty friends and colleagues, you gotta take the time, you gotta leave, and you just have to turn the pager off, and you have to stop your work, and if the chart has to be dealt with the next day, you deal with it the next day. You get more efficient. The first couple of years out, you're very slow as a clinician. You get more efficient each year. You learn to manage things better. And after 5 or 10 years, you get very efficient because it's all compiled learning. It's pattern recognition. You've seen a post-op MI. You know what medicines to give. You know when to cast, when not to cast. You know when to stent, when not to stent. And so a lot of the labor of decision-making you go through that takes so long now is quicker for you. So you can be more efficient. But you just have to set some boundaries and some limits. And I think for your personal life, you have to decide, if you're married or if you have a significant other, children, you need to set aside time and dedicate to them, and then you have to let your career work around that. One of my very successful colleagues, her husband, has said this over the last 20 years. She gets up every morning at 4 a.m. and writes on grants before 7. I don't, my best sleeping is before 7. It doesn't work for me, but I'm glad it works for her. And so we all do that. My best writing, when I was writing a lot of papers back to be promoted, occurred from about 9 p.m. to 1 a.m. So I was late in work several nights a week and just do my writing. And it was, the kids were in bed and I could do it in 50 hours and you do it. So you give up a lot of things, right? And I talk with my patients, and I don't know not your patients, but patients with me in Rochester are largely people from rural Minnesota, rural Iowa, rural Wisconsin, where they like to hunt and fish, and they're big football fans and basketball fans. And I tell them, if I can get up the NFL now, it's medical. I was watching football for a long time after training. I went back, so I didn't have time. I haven't been deer hunting since medical school because it's just a lower priority, and I've given up all hunting and fishing. And now I have my youngest child is 12, and he's his son, and he likes to fish. So I now think to get some on the weekends in the summer. But for the longest time, I just gave up fishing. I had some hobbies I didn't pursue for a while because I didn't have time. And so there are seasons of life you cut back on things you enjoy. The biggest mistake I think I made was cutting back too much on doing some fun stuff with my family and trying to get promoted to be a full professor before I was 40. I could have taken until I was 45 and had more time with my family because the younger two kids have had a different life than the older two kids in terms of how much I've been around, how much things I could do because I was so focused on writing and reading. And so I think you have to figure it out for yourself, but it's okay to say no to work. And you have to set some reasonable hours and boundaries. And everybody's different. But I think I'd like to do anything that empower you to say no in some cases and say yes to others. But you have to set those. You're a professional and you have to set those because work will always ask more from you than you know. Academia will always ask more from you. My colleagues who are full-time researchers say that researchers they end up spending more time doing that than they do with their spouses and their families. It's frustrating. So you have to sort of set some boundaries.
Some of the pitfalls you've seen early career cardiologists make in terms of career choices, or just some things that you see more commonly that we can try to avoid?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for asking that. Number one is being too impatient, expecting too much too quickly in terms of promotion and leadership roles and honor and recognition. Believe it or not, medicine is a profession you'll stay until you're 70 most likely. So it's okay that some of those accolades and honors come after 55. That's one, for being too impatient. Number two is train of thought, sorry about that. What's the other thing I want to say? To be too impatient, I think repeat your question for me.
Common pitfalls in your early career.
Yeah.
Cardiologists.
Yeah. Number two is changing jobs. Changing jobs too often. I teach my residents that the best way to become forward as a doctor is to have too many spouses, too many homes, too many cities that you live in. That you can't really find happiness by changing jobs. You need to stay if you can. The job is good. You don't expect perfection in the job. You stay with it because you reward it for longevity. All of us can have jobs where it's a bad fit. It's okay to lose those. But, one of my fellows who's now a very successful investigator has changed academic centers 3 or 4 times. He's now living 500 miles apart from his wife and children. Now he's flying by Southwest Airlines to the cities every Friday and Sunday night. I think it's crazy. That's not for me. But I'm not sure he used to do that. My advisor in med school told me that. He said, I moved 1 time too many. I think he's right. I think moving too often, jumping to be an associate professor at Iowa and then jumping to go to Wisconsin to be full professor. When if you stayed at Minnesota, you could have been full professor. That's another mistake that I see. I think the third mistake I see was young colleagues getting so focused on something. And, I have a young faculty I'm mentoring right now, and he wants to do everything. And I say to him, you got to pick a couple of things that you focus on. That's it. Clyde Yancey, who's at Northwestern, gave a talk like this once, and Clyde said, everybody should have something they own for their practice, their division, department, that you're an expert on. Maybe it's resuscitation, maybe it's stats, maybe it's exercise, maybe it's heart failure, maybe it's devices. But you own something that you're the expert on, and your colleagues come to you to talk about. That's about all you can be an expert on. It's just focus on something you really like. All of it's fun right now, I'm sure you are used to those days, but a lot of it gets routine. So focus on the stuff that you really think will be intellectually stimulating, professionally rewarding, and focus on a small area, because that will give a lot of benefits. So those are the 3 or 4 things, right? So, being too impatient for recognition, not focusing, particularly not reducing that, being too impatient, and moving around a lot at all. The only pitfalls there. grass is never really a lot greener on the other side. Other questions?
So, I know you mentioned earlier, like, you're trying to find jobs for your fellows and stuff. So when do you talk to your fellows, when they're, I know that the jobs are changing, there are more private jobs and extra jobs, and so, when do you talk to your fellows to kind of initiate, do they talk to other faculty, and then I'm in the job search right now, and so I'm talking to people, and I go on websites, or going to the hospitals, like, what do you talk to your fellows to give them the best chance to find the best fit for their?
Well, I first try to understand what they really want to do. And I ask them, what drives you? What do you want to do? And we try to drill down a bit on why do you want to do that? And for many, they don't recognize that the reason they want to be an academic physician is because they want to live near their parents in the East Metro Twin Cities. They got the best job market in the East Metro. Or they want to, their spouse is from southern Minnesota and they want to be a commission educator at Mayo because they want to stay at Mayo. And so once you can understand really what the most important factors are, then I help them to think more broadly about it. So many of our fellows don't want to be basic scientists. They want to be clinician educators or do a little bit of research, be largely clinicians. And they're very concerned that if they leave an academic center, they can't be teaching or research. And I point out to them that, from my standpoint, I'm a clinical trialist now. That's something I got interested in fellowship and was lucky enough to do. That most of the people who do the studies that I help design are not in academic medicine. They are in large groups and practices that they have the patients, And so we bring the trials to where the patients are and the doctors who are focused and willing to do it. So there's lots of opportunities to do what you like to do, think creatively about it, but figure out what the core essentials are. And if the core essentials are that you want to be close to your elderly parents, then figure out what being close means. And maybe it's a 3-hour car drive or a 1-hour flight, or it's being able to get home on a Friday afternoon, see them if they have a health crisis, and you can get off work. Because I lived in the same state with my parents for a year, and I had never got to see them. So I was too busy as a clinician. They'd come over and see me, but I could never get over to see them when they were 4 hours away. I saw them more working at Mayo than I did really than working with them. I think it's a common issue. People look at it. It's really very busy. I think in terms of the job search, start early, start your second year of fellowship. Because the best jobs are the ones that are not advertised, the word of mouth. Take advantage of the great resources you have here. All your faculty know people, and they know where jobs are, and they'll help you find them. And, if you hate this winter climate, you've got to have a warmer southern climate, then ask them to network with people who have positions here. And, if you want to live in the Twin Cities, look broadly at what you can do in the Twin Cities, because there are lots of cardiology options here, and there will be in the next 10 years as people start to retire who are still hanging on in their 70s. They are going to retire. We're going to go from having sort of a glut of physicians with not enough jobs to having not just a crisis of not having enough cardiologists to fill the jobs at some point in urban areas, so people are going to retire. And then that will be full day. But that's what I would say. Start early. Figure out what's critical for you, and then try to match yourself to that. If your critical thing is being a basic scientist and a clinical cardiologist, then you may have to move somewhere besides Minneapolis to do that, if there's a job here for you. That might mean on the West Coast, it might mean in the Southwest, it might mean in the East Coast, but you get to do what you love doing. And most places in this country are in that delivery. And include Canada as well, because I think most of them work in Canada if there's a job open in the United States. Great to see so many people interested in cardiology. What drove you guys into cardiology? What brought you into cardiology? Yeah, I like it. I like auscultation as a medical EKG. I thought it would be fun to do that. So, what about your colleague decided? What brought you into cardiology?
historically, I like to look, but
It'll be sort of community or society-based convention on your foundation. Yeah. And did you pick this program because of the world-renowned status of the University of Harvard?
yeah, it's a big factor. Yeah, I did my year, so I was fortunate enough to have that connection already. But yeah,
It's really quite renowned and well known for that. So that's, what brought you into cardiology? You went to State Neilsville or?
Going back.
I just love cardio mindset jobs. How hard to work and how hard to and how
Brought you into cardiology?
I like.
Yeah. I like to pick people. I like people around the break. I like the people. So, and I'm like,
You like critically ill people. Yeah. It's one of the key fields in medicine, right, where you can deal with a very stable group of patients, a very unstable group of patients, people who are dying to see you, right? Or you can deal with people who have chronic conditions that you're mitigating and modulating. What brought you into cardiology?
I like changing it because, that fabric matters really key. And also the fact that people do so much in this aspect, and the reason that there's this timely connection part of it, critical care part of it.
I have to say, I got lucky. I had no idea we could have so many innovations in cardiology. It's graduate for 2 years now. Now, in fact, I think maybe 20 years now. Barry Francis, who just walked by, they say the same. Others, what brought you into cardiology?
I always like the acronyms. People always thought I was smart because I knew all the acronyms for all the trials. But it's honestly the data. There's so much data available, so I found research to be easier to do in
Saying the
cardiology.
difference in rheumatology.
Yeah. So I think that's a huge asset, having access to just a ton of data. So from a research perspective, it made things easier. And then, like as everybody else points out, physiology with patients.
I like it because people can get better too. When I was a resident in oncology, it wasn't as successful as it is today. I'm glad it's a lot better. Barry, what brought you into cardiology?
Yeah, good question. I liked it as a student. So even as a student, I went to all the GAP conferences. I think you know. So, cardiology is actually sort of a natural fit. Popular.
Well, Dr. Francis has arrived. Does that mean it's time for cases?
I'm just coming in to check on you guys, make sure everything's. Scott and I are old friends. We go back a long way, and I really watched his career develop. Clinical cardiologist, a great teacher, lectured all over the world.
I have a quick more question. When somebody applies for a job in your institution or any institution, what's the things that you look for? Whatever number. Yeah. You look at the CV that you have to have, this applicant has to have the CV. or something make you, I want to do this. Sure. We want to see that they have superb letters of permission. be good doctors, and they have to have an investigative bent. They have to have been publishing or be academically engaged to some extent, because almost all of our young hires now are required to sort of become a associate professor, so they do sort of tenure. And then I think also we want to make sure that they feel that Rochester is a good long-term fit, because Rochester is a much smaller city than Minneapolis or St. Paul. And despite all the news you've heard about with our destination medical center and all that's going on in Rochester, it's really a small town. And so we want to make sure that people, an applicant feel comfortable there, that they can adjust weather in Minnesota, because most of the people leave, the most common reasons they leave are that they don't like the weather or their spouse is unhappy. And so we want to make sure it's a good fit, because it's expensive to bring someone in, and then to see them not be successful. I'm mentoring a young faculty member now. I think he's a good fit, but I've told him that in 5 years, what I want is for him to be able to go anywhere in the world should he decide not to stay a doctor. I think that's important. I think when you go into academic medicine, more importantly than being successful at that institution, they need to help you be successful at who you are, so that you can go anywhere you want, should it not be a good fit. But there may be intangibles that happen that you may not be able to stay there long term. You may end up having a divorce of some sort, or you may get married and you need to go somewhere else because of that. You may, I've had colleagues who have developed issues with cold agglutins and they can't stay in Minnesota, so they have to go to warmer climates just to get a phenomenon constantly. And we've had colleagues who have had children die in Rochester, and it's so traumatic they can't stay in the city for the leave because it's emotionally too hard. Those are all intangibles. Nothing to do with your success as a doctor or researcher. So those are the 3 criteria. Great clinicians, academically engaged and successful, and it's basically consist in the climate and the culture of being in a small town. If you need what's in Minneapolis every night in terms of nightlife, restaurants, theater, then you're going to have to commute from the Twin Cities down. Or if you leave New York, Broadway like New York, you need to go to New York, and that's okay. Many people don't want big cities to do, so Rochester's a place if you don't want a big city. It's kind of like Dartmouth, right? Maybe you do some Dartmouth. Small town, smaller than Rochester, much smaller, half the size of Rochester, right? I think. Yeah. What do you find the biggest challenges in training right now? Wait for your generation. Don't tell me what you personally feel. I don't want to put anybody on the spot. But if we were to poll you, say what are the biggest challenges that fellows face today with fellowship? What are they?
I think it's the diversity of which everyone has been specialized in cardiology. That it's really hard to come out and say, oh, I want to. It seems like you said you want to be skillful, be valuable to which is now a large group. There's very few small groups of 3 to 4 people practicing. I mean, kind of everyone is a general approach, but now you really need to have that niche which makes you strong in a certain area. And I think it's hard because each area, MRI, CT, echo, PET, everything has become so complicated and so much generated in terms of data that it's hard. I see here it's just hard to figure out where to go without much more different options and how much more work you have to put into that one area. That seems that the burgeoning experts that's are different than others. You're using echo and that easy condition.
Other thoughts? What do you find in your generation of fellows find to be challenging?
Good quality of education. That's something that.
Coupled with being a good clinician, learning clinical medicine, but the research to publish simultaneously. Yes, it's like picking 2 or 3, sleep, research, publications, clinical education, you have 2 or 3, is that it? Yeah. I think I have to agree. I look at who we pick for fellowship, and they want them to have so many publications. Really of the opinion that good internal medicine resident doesn't have time to write a lot of papers. Internal medicine training is very tedious. broad, and you have to be reading and learning a lot. I don't know, I'm impressed, just because we publish, I think I only had 2 or 3 papers published on the residence, and that was short. And, you had to do some to get the fellowship. Thanks for that, and then, I don't know, I think it's a question to 10. Yes. I don't know that there are disadvantages. I think it's better. There was very little concern about us learning to do things simulation before. Now you can do simulated cast and simple lines and pacemakers. I think that's very helpful. I think if we understand what core processes are now, and we're sort of teaching that instead of just saying 3 years you're done. I think also we pay much more attention to work-life balance by trying to give you restrictions on how many hours you can work. When I was a fellow in our ICU, we did every other night call for a month, and that was considered easy because 5 years before the fellows all did 30 days in a row and then lost. But I know that I had memory loss when I was on every other night. There's the best days when you're on call, worst days when you're close call. And I got a call in January from a friend who said, "Why didn't you and your wife come for Christmas?" And I said, "What?" He said, "I called you 2 weeks ago, invited you for Christmas dinner, you said you was done." I remember the phone call, I said, "He's not like he's tired." That was on a month I was on our CCU. I think the work balance, work-life hours off are much more important now. I think they're reasonable. I think it's probably still making people work too hard. If anything, I would like to see training extended another year and give you more time off. I also think we need to really, for residency especially, we need to reward people who just, you see a lot of things on residency. You're getting a great education. You know, the colleagues who never get positions on call. That's really not equitable. You're learning more, they're not. We need to make sure that when you see cases as a part failure, cases as a non-spending, that's checked off. And if you're done with that aspect of your training, you go on to something else. Once you complete it, whether it's 3 years, it's 23 months, 38 months, whatever it takes, that's what you that's what I think. It's never going to happen, but I think we got to reward people getting busy, and we got to make sure you're confident before you leave. So I don't know that I see it as a disadvantage. I think there's probably never been a better time to train than now because we're learning better about how to teach. But it is hard to learn all of this. I admire what you guys are going through. You know? When I did EP training as a fellow, the biggest chore was learning how to find the bundle of tests and samples. You guys still do that EP training in your fellowship? Oh, is that right? Yeah. Oh, my goodness. I'm going to spend 30, 40 minutes trying to find the bundle. And ICDs were fairly new when I was in training. I really liked them. And I learned how to program them and deal with them, you know. But there were a lot of complexities with them that we didn't understand that you now have the benefit of. What you have to know compared to what I have to know is probably 60%.
One of the cases.
Well, tell me, what are the challenges you see on fellowship? What do you foresee these generations see?
One thing that I don't know if everybody's, I'm not sure this is particular to Minnesota, but it seems like there's always a financial-driven institution, and that those desires and needs never mesh necessarily with the training side of it.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure we necessarily see.
I think that's a real issue, actually. I know I was in the ECG lab at Mayo on New Year's Eve, and there was a resident that I worked with several times who was in there with me, and I had extra patients scheduled that day. Usually our ECG lab is full-time rotation, but I had booked 2 patients on. And I said to him, "Would you like to have the day off?" "Well, you know, New Year's Eve, don't you have plans?" I said, "No, seriously, I have 2 extra patients, and I